They had him in handcuffs. They had dressed him in an orange jumpsuit and seated him behind the defense table inside a courtroom that smelled of mildew and broken promises. They had a case file filled with planted evidence, a cooperative prosecutor, and a long history of escaping responsibility for the same kind of corruption. Detective Grant Rourke leaned back in his chair with his arms folded across his chest. A quiet smirk rested on his face, the expression of a man who believed he had already written the ending. He had no idea that the man sitting in those handcuffs had been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time. He did not understand that the ending he had written was about to be torn apart, burned, and buried. The chain of events began quietly, as the most catastrophic nights often did. Dorian Mercer drove a rented black Audi A6 through the Riverside district of Harlow City, a mid-sized Georgia metropolis that appeared respectable from the highway, but revealed its decay once a person traveled beyond the welcome signs. He wore a navy wool coat and a silver watch inherited from his late father. His expression remained calm no matter what happened around him. People who knew Dorian well often described his face as still water. The surface revealed nothing about the depth beneath it. Dorian stopped at a red light near the intersection of Calvert Street and 9th Avenue. A police cruiser pulled alongside him. When traffic began moving again, Dorian continued down the road. Soon afterward, the cruiser's lights erupted behind him, red and blue flashes cutting through the fog like a warning from something ancient. Dorian pulled over. He placed both hands where they could be clearly seen on the steering wheel. His breathing remained steady. He had experienced this before. Nearly every black man in America understood the ritual. The officer who approached the driver's window was Detective First Class Grant Rourke, although Dorian would not learn his full name until later. In that first moment, Dorian saw a broad-shouldered white officer with a rigid jaw and the particular arrogance that developed when authority remained unchecked for too long. Grant had spent much of his career inside the Harlow City Police Department. He had received official commendations. Complaints filed against him had disappeared before investigators examined them. An internal affairs file concerning his conduct had been sealed under circumstances no one wanted to discuss. A second officer stepped from the passenger side of the cruiser. Detective Caleb Voss was younger, with closely cropped red hair and restless eyes that constantly searched for exits. Caleb had worked as Grant's partner for a long time. Everyone inside the department understood that wherever Grant went, Caleb followed. Wherever Caleb followed, people without the resources to protect themselves often suffered. License and registration, Grant said. There was no please, no sir, and no polite greeting. Only 3 clipped words delivered, as though the entire interaction already bored him. Dorian handed over both documents without comment. Grant examined them with exaggerated slowness, performing authority rather than responsibly exercising it. Step out of the vehicle. May I ask why you stopped me? Grant's eyes became flat. Broken taillight, step out. The taillight was not broken. Dorian had inspected the Audi when he collected it from the rental agency. He inspected everything. He always inspected everything. Even so, he stepped from the vehicle. What happened afterward unfolded quickly, with the smooth and practiced efficiency of men who had repeated the same operation many times. Caleb moved toward the Audi's passenger side, while Grant kept Dorian standing near the driver's door. Grant announced that he would conduct a protective search for officer safety. Dorian complied. While Dorian's hands rested on the roof and Grant searched along his sides, Caleb opened the passenger door. He reached into the glove compartment and placed something inside. It was a small vacuum-sealed package containing what appeared to be approximately 40 grams of cocaine. Grant walked around the vehicle, opened the passenger door, and looked inside. Well, I'll be damned, he said slowly, performing theatrical surprise. Dorian's expression did not change. The still water did not ripple. The officers arrested him. They placed him in handcuffs and recited his rights in a tone suggesting that the entire procedure was an inconvenience. They put him in the rear of the cruiser. As the vehicle pulled away, Grant looked into the rearview mirror at the man sitting behind him. Another one off the street, he told Caleb in an almost cheerful voice. Caleb laughed. Dorian sat with his hands cuffed behind his back, his father's silver watch pressing painfully against his wrist. He looked through the window at the fog-covered streets of Harlow City. Good, he thought, now we begin. The Harlow City Police Department's holding facility smelled equally of bleach and despair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead at a frequency that seemed designed to erode any sense of time. Officers photographed and fingerprinted Dorian. They removed his watch, phone, wallet, and coat. The intake officer, Corporal Russell Dean, entered the information with the mechanical indifference of someone completing an ordinary inventory form. While Russell typed, Grant stood near the counter and talked. He spoke the way men did after they stopped fearing consequences, loosely, loudly, and with their chests expanded, filling every silence with their own certainty. 40 grams, Grant said to no one in particular. That supports intent to distribute. The district attorney will love this. Clean arrest, clean evidence, no complications. Caleb leaned against the wall and looked at his phone. What is his story? Did he say anything? Not one word, Grant replied. He stared at me during the entire drive as though he were memorizing my face. Grant laughed dismissively. Let him stare. It will not matter where he's going. Officers placed Dorian inside a holding cell with 3 other men. One was young and visibly terrified. Another was an older, heavy-set man sleeping on the bench and snoring. The third was thin with a tattoo across his neck. He studied Dorian briefly, nodded once, and returned to his own thoughts. Dorian sat on the bench and rested his forearms upon his knees. Then he waited. He had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. It is important to understand exactly who Dorian Mercer was because the courtroom would eventually make his identity unmistakably clear. Inside that holding cell, however, he appeared to be only another black man inside a cage. The system surrounding him operated exactly as it had been designed to operate when it encountered men who looked like him. Dorian had grown up in Clifton Heights, Atlanta, not the wealthy section featured in travel publications. He had been raised in a single-parent household by a mother who worked 2 jobs. His father had worked 3 jobs until the final one helped send him to an early grave. Dorian had shown unusual intelligence since childhood. Some teachers recognized his ability. Others resented it. He earned a scholarship to Morehouse College and later received a full scholarship to Georgetown Law, where he graduated 3rd in his class. He clerked for a federal judge in the 11th Circuit. He then served as an assistant United States attorney prosecuting organized crime and public corruption cases with a conviction record that made experienced attorneys uncomfortable in the way excellence sometimes did. Eventually, Dorian was appointed to a position that almost no one inside the police station would have imagined existed. He became Special Investigative Counsel for the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division's Office of Police Accountability. His classified mandate was highly specific. He was responsible for building prosecutable federal cases against law enforcement agencies engaged in systematic evidence planting, civil rights violations, and organized corruption. Dorian had been investigating the Harlow City Police Department for a long time. Grant Rourke had been one of his primary subjects throughout much of that investigation. Inside the holding cell, the frightened young prisoner asked what charge had brought him there. Planted evidence, Dorian answered. The young man nodded slowly, as though the explanation did not surprise him. Do you have a lawyer? I have access to one. A public defender? No, Dorian said, not a public defender. He offered no further explanation. He sat beneath the humming fluorescent lights and waited. The Harlow City District Attorney's Office was led by Everett Langford, a career politician with polished suits and the confidence of a man who had never lost anything that truly mattered. Everett was tall and silver-haired, with a handshake so forceful that it bordered on aggression. He was not unintelligent. He had simply accepted the machinery of his office, including the parts that bent whenever convenient. His leading drug case prosecutor was Camille Reyes. Camille was efficient and remarkably precise. She protected her high conviction rate with the intensity of someone who understood exactly how much those numbers meant to her career. She was not corrupt in the same direct way as Grant. Her corruption was quieter and more common. Camille believed what police officers told her. She avoided asking questions that might complicate their answers. She measured justice largely through victory. When Dorian's file reached her desk, she reviewed it quickly. Approximately 40 grams of cocaine had been found inside the rented vehicle. The chain of custody paperwork appeared clean. Grant and Caleb were consistently meticulous with reports, which was one reason they had avoided exposure for so long. Dorian had no criminal history. Camille briefly found that unusual, but she did not consider it important enough to delay the case. She requested bail at an amount most defendants would struggle to pay and moved the case toward arraignment. No one inside the district attorney's office searched Dorian Mercer's name through federal databases. No one contacted his employer. No one asked why a man without a criminal record would drive through Riverside with 40 grams of cocaine hidden inside the glove compartment of a rental vehicle. No one questioned why the rental agreement in his name contained no indication of previous problems involving that Audi. They saw what they expected to see. Then they moved forward with the speed of a system that had learned long ago that certain questions interfered with efficiency. Dorian eventually made one telephone call from the holding facility. He contacted a secure number in Washington. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. Her name was Simone Okafor. She served as deputy director of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. When she heard Dorian's voice, her professional tone became sharply alert. "Tell me," she said. "It happened," Dorian replied. Rourke and Voss acted exactly as expected and exactly as documented in the previous cases. Simone paused. "Are you all right?" "Completely. I need you to allow this to continue. Do not contact the district attorney. Do not send anyone to intervene. Let the case reach arraignment and allow it to proceed to trial when necessary. Another silence followed. Dorian, that could... I understand what it could become. Let it continue. I need them comfortable. Simone remained quiet. You have everything you need? I have everything I have collected throughout the investigation. What I need now is a courtroom. Dorian ended the call. He returned to the bench, folded his hands, and waited. He later appeared in a courtroom of the Harlow County Superior Court for arraignment. Dorian wore the clothing in which he had been arrested, now slightly wrinkled. He declined the public defender assigned to him and elected to represent himself during the proceeding. The clerk raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The Honorable Lenora Hastings presided. Judge Hastings was known for her impatience with theatrical attorneys and for following procedure with meticulous care. She believed she had seen everything a courtroom could offer. Camille stood at the prosecution table, polished and prepared. Grant sat in the gallery behind her with the same quiet smirk. Caleb sat beside him, looking at his phone until a bailiff ordered him to put it away. Dorian stood alone at the defense table. Judge Hastings examined him over her glasses. Mr. Mercer, you have chosen to represent yourself during this proceeding. Yes, Your Honor. You understand that you have a right to legal counsel? I do. And you are waiving that right? For this proceeding, yes, I will retain counsel before trial. The judge studied him longer than she normally would. There was something unusual in the way he stood. He was neither defiant nor frightened. He was simply composed in a manner that did not match what the room expected from a defendant facing serious drug charges. Judge Hastings silently noted it and continued. The court read the charge of possessing a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Dorian entered a plea of not guilty. Camille requested the high bail amount she had already selected. Dorian did not oppose it. That was unusual. Most defendants would have begun calculating how much a bond company would charge or how long they might remain in custody. Dorian simply said, I will pay the entire amount, Your Honor. Camille turned toward him. Judge Hastings looked at him again. Even the experienced court reporter briefly raised her eyes from the stenography machine. Grant's smirk shifted almost imperceptibly. Dorian paid the full cash bail and walked from the Harlow County Correctional Facility into the thin sunlight. He stood on the sidewalk, straightened his coat, and contacted someone using a second personal phone. The device police had confiscated during booking was not his only telephone. Dorian always carried two. I am out, he said. Begin preparing the filings. We are approaching the end. The preparations that followed remained invisible to everyone in Harlow City. They took place inside secure federal offices in Washington and inside a rented law firm conference room in Atlanta that had been repeatedly inspected for surveillance equipment. The attorney Dorian selected was Conrad Vale. Conrad was semi-retired and among the most decorated civil litigation attorneys in the southeastern United States. He had argued before the Supreme Court. Former opponents described his cross-examinations with traumatized respect. They compared the experience to being autopsied while still alive. Conrad had also mentored Dorian at Georgetown Law. When they sat across from each other inside the secure conference room, Dorian pushed a case file across the table. Conrad opened it. He remained silent for a long while. He was not shocked. He was reading with extraordinary care the way a surgeon examined a scan before lifting a scalpel. The file contained an extensive body of documentation divided into 7 sections. The first section covered Grant Rourke and Caleb Voss. It contained their professional histories, commendations, disciplinary records, disappeared complaints, and the sealed internal affairs file. The second section contained surveillance records, vehicle movements, telephone data obtained through federal warrants, and time-stamped photographs. The third section contained sworn testimony from 11 previous defendants, 10 black men and 1 black woman, arrested by Grant and Caleb on drug charges that Dorian's investigation identified as almost certainly involving planted evidence. 4 had already served portions of prison sentences. 2 remained incarcerated. The fourth section contained a forensic analysis of the drug evidence chain of custody in 8 cases, including Dorian's case. A federal laboratory identified a distinctive batch marker inside cocaine used in 3 different arrests. The incidents had occurred separately, yet the narcotics originated from the same source. The evidence planted inside 3 different vehicles had come from one supply. The fifth section focused on money. Grant possessed a savings account inconsistent with his police salary. He had purchased a lake house under his wife's maiden name. His daughter's private college tuition had been paid in full through a limited liability company. Federal forensic accountants traced that company through several corporate layers to Desmond Cole, a mid-level drug distributor operating in Riverside. The sixth section documented Dorian's undercover operation. It included the route he deliberately selected, the rental vehicle obtained under his own name to create a clean paper trail, and the taillight inspection proving the equipment worked before the stop. It also included footage from a hidden body camera disguised as a lapel pin. The device recorded Grant's approach, the traffic stop, and the period during which Caleb stood alone near the passenger side of the Audi. The seventh section contained federal charges that senior Department of Justice attorneys had already drafted, reviewed, and approved. Those charges awaited only the conclusion of the state proceeding. The investigators wanted every piece of evidence placed into a public court record under oath before the federal case descended. Conrad closed the file and studied Dorian. "You allowed them to arrest you?" "Yes." "You allowed them to place you inside a cell?" "I did." "Why did you not identify yourself as soon as they approached?" Dorian looked at his hands. "Because the 11 people before me did not have that option. They could not identify themselves as federal officials and make the danger disappear. They simply went to jail. I needed to understand completely and personally inside my own body what they experienced. I also needed a courtroom where everything these men had done would enter the record under oath and in public, not inside a sealed federal filing. In public, where every person in this city could see it." Conrad continued looking at him. Then he opened the file again. "Tell me when you are ready to begin," he said. The state trial against Dorian Mercer eventually opened inside a crowded courtroom of the Harlow County Superior Court. Almost every seat in the gallery was occupied. That was unusual for an ordinary drug possession case. People had heard that the defendant paid his full cash bail without hesitation. They knew he had appeared at arraignment without an attorney and seemed completely untroubled. They also knew the lawyer now sitting beside him was Conrad Vale, whose face had appeared repeatedly on the covers of legal publications. Grant sat in the gallery wearing a suit and tie. The smirk had weakened. He watched Dorian and Conrad with the focused attention of a man who had started to suspect that something might be wrong. Caleb did not appear. He called the station and claimed he was ill. No one asked further questions. Judge Lenora Hastings presided. Camille Reyes represented the state. Conrad Vale defended Dorian. The prosecution opened in its usual manner. Camille presented the traffic stop, discovery of the drugs, chain of custody records, and laboratory confirmation that the substance was cocaine. She called Corporal Russell Dean to describe the booking process. She called a forensic chemist from the state laboratory who testified that the evidence consisted of approximately 41 grams of cocaine hydrochloride, an amount consistent with intent to distribute. Conrad's cross-examination of Russell was brief and almost indifferent. His questions for the chemist were precise and highly technical. He focused upon methods used to identify the narcotics batch. The questions confused Camille and appeared to bore much of the jury. 2 jurors, however, listened with increasing attention. After proceedings ended, Grant approached Camille in the courthouse corridor. "What is Vale doing?" he asked. "His job," Camille answered, irritated that a witness was questioning her. "Relax. Do not become paranoid." "I am not paranoid. You will testify. Tell the same story you have always told. It has always worked." Grant nodded. He walked toward the elevator. By the time the doors closed, the smirk had completely disappeared. Grant later entered the witness box. Camille guided him smoothly through the arrest. He described the traffic stop and the supposedly broken taillight. He explained the protective search and the discovery of cocaine. Grant was confident and specific. He was an experienced witness who carried the easy authority of a police officer accustomed to being believed. The jurors watched him with the basic deference that prosecutors understood and often depended upon. Then Conrad stood. He rose slowly like an older man conserving his strength for something important. He walked to the podium and placed a single sheet of paper upon it. For a moment, he simply looked at Grant. Experienced cross-examiners sometimes use silence as a weapon. It forced the witness to wonder and sharpened everyone's attention. "Detective Rourke," Conrad said in an unnervingly calm voice, "you testified that you observed a broken taillight on my client's vehicle." "That is correct." "And that defect formed the legal basis for the traffic stop?" "Yes." Conrad picked up the document. "Your Honor, the defense offers Exhibit A certified maintenance and inspection record from the rental agency. It confirms that the vehicle rented by my client was inspected and that every exterior light was fully functional shortly before the stop." He handed the document to the clerk. Camille immediately stood. "Objection. Foundation." "The record contains the certified mechanic's signature and a notarized statement," when Conrad replied. "The foundation has been established." Judge Hastings reviewed the document. "Objection overruled." Conrad turned back toward Grant. "In light of the inspection record, can you explain why the taillight appeared broken?" Grant's jaw tightened slightly. Lights can fail after inspection, and it happens. It does, Conrad said, placing the document down. Detective, you conducted a protective search of my client during the stop. For officer safety. During that search, your partner stood on the passenger side of the vehicle. He was securing the area. He remained alone beside the passenger door. He was performing his duty. Conrad lifted a tablet. Your Honor, the defense offers Exhibit B, an audiovisual recording of the traffic stop. Camille rose again. Objection, the defense did not disclose. The exhibit appeared on the list filed with the court and provided to the prosecution, Conrad said. It was described as an audiovisual recording of the traffic stop encounter. Judge Hastings looked toward Camille. Counsel, did you receive that list? Camille's composure faltered. I received it, Your Honor, but I have not. The exhibit is admissible. Proceed. The courtroom display illuminated. The video was clear. It came from Dorian's chest, angled slightly downward toward the Audi's passenger window. Caleb appeared on the passenger side. He moved around the vehicle. Then he leaned through the window. His hand moved toward the glove compartment. He opened it. His hand entered. His hand came back out. He closed the compartment. Grant then appeared at the passenger door. He opened it, leaned inside, and straightened. His face turned partially toward the hidden camera. The expression tried very hard to resemble surprise. The courtroom became completely silent. A woman in the gallery inhaled sharply. Grant's face turned the color of old paper. Detective Rourke, Conrad said calmly, can you identify the man placing an object inside my client's glove compartment? Grant said nothing. For the record, is that your partner, Detective Caleb Voss? The room continued holding its breath. I want an attorney, Grant said. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hastings struck her gavel repeatedly before the noise subsided. She looked toward Camille with an expression containing confusion, professional discomfort, and rapidly growing alarm. Counsel, do you need a recess? Camille stood beside the prosecution table, staring at the frozen image of Caleb's hand beside the open glove compartment. She looked like someone slowly realizing that the building around her was not the building she believed she had entered. The state requests a recess, Camille said, somehow keeping her voice steady. Judge Hastings granted it. Before leaving the bench, she studied Dorian once again. His expression remained calm. The still water had not moved. Something changed in the judge's face, although she said nothing. The gallery emptied into the corridor in controlled chaos as spectators attempted to make telephone calls simultaneously. Conrad leaned toward Dorian. Ready? He asked quietly. Almost, Dorian replied. During the recess, two events unfolded at once. Grant called Caleb. The call went to voicemail. He tried again with the same result. When someone finally answered, it was not Caleb. A calm professional voice spoke. This is Special Agent Elias Monroe of the FBI Civil Rights Unit. Detective Voss is in federal custody. Is this Detective Rourke? Grant ended the call. He stood in the courthouse corridor holding his phone. For the first time in a very long while, he felt afraid. Inside District Attorney Everett Langford's office, Camille spoke to her supervisor in clipped, controlled sentences. Everett sat motionless inside a large leather chair and asked short, precise questions. The answers seemed to make his silver hair appear grayer. When the court reconvened, Camille rose and said something she had rarely, if ever, said during her career. Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss every charge against the defendant. Judge Hastings watched her. On what grounds? Evidence tampering. The integrity of the arrest has been compromised. The motion is granted. The judge paused and looked toward Conrad. Does the defense object? We do not object to dismissal, Conrad said. However, the defense has an additional motion. I will hear it. Conrad placed both hands upon the podium. Your Honor, we ask the court to receive the complete investigative file compiled by my client. He paused. Everyone in the courtroom would remember that silence. Special Investigative Counsel Dorian A. Mercer of the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The silence that followed was unlike ordinary silence. It was the silence after an earthquake when movement stopped, but nothing remained as it had been. Judge Hastings slowly removed her glasses. The defendant is a federal officer? Dorian stood. He had waited for this moment throughout the entire investigation. His expression did not reveal triumph. It was quieter and more settled. The expression of someone who had carried a great weight and could finally put it down. Special Investigative Counsel, Your Honor. My credentials are contained in Defense Exhibit C, along with a letter from the Deputy Director of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division confirming my appointment and investigative authority. Dorian removed the documents from his jacket. The clerk delivered them to the judge. She read them while the courtroom watched her expression transform. Judge Hastings placed the papers on the bench. Then she looked into the gallery. She found Grant sitting several rows back with his hands resting upon his knees. No trace of the smirk remained. "Bailiff," she said with complete control and something hard as granite beneath her voice, "detain Detective Rourke." Events then moved with the speed of something that had been building for a long time and had finally lost all resistance. Grant was arrested inside the same courtroom where he expected to watch Dorian convicted. Officers placed handcuffs around his wrists. They led him past this gallery and past spectators who had arrived expecting an ordinary drug trial. Those spectators left carrying a story they would repeat for the rest of their lives. Their silence was more devastating than shouting could have been. The FBI had already arrested Caleb at his apartment on the southern side of Harlow City. He answered the door wearing a bathrobe because he believed the building superintendent was outside. It was not the superintendent. Caleb reportedly remained silent during the beginning of federal custody. Later, he said a great deal. The district attorney's office opened an internal review. Everett issued a statement declaring that his office would cooperate fully with federal investigators and examine every recent drug case arising from arrests conducted by Grant and Caleb. The statement did not mention that an FBI liaison had privately informed Everett that cooperation was not optional. It also did not reveal that federal investigators were examining the district attorney's own handling of potentially compromised evidence. Camille's name did not appear in the first public statements. After the office emptied, however, she remained alone, looking differently at the case files she had previously accepted without question. She reviewed the prosecutions. She had moved through the system without asking what should have been obvious. Her private accounting did not favor her. Camille later cooperated with federal investigators and testified against Grant and Caleb. During a sworn deposition, she admitted that she had pursued convictions with a deliberate lack of curiosity about the foundations beneath them. She lost her position. Prosecutors did not charge her criminally. That decision generated considerable debate. In Riverside, federal agents arrested Desmond Cole, the drug distributor connected to the financing of Grant's lake house. A joint FBI and Drug Enforcement Administration task force found him inside a warehouse. Desmond had already been cooperating with investigators under a formal agreement. After Dorian's investigation identified him, federal officials offered him a reduced sentence in exchange for complete disclosure. Desmond was a practical man. He accepted. His cooperation became one of the principal foundations of the financial evidence. The arrests directly connected to Dorian's investigation eventually included Grant, Caleb, and several additional officers identified through Caleb's cooperation and Desmond's testimony. Another significant arrest followed. Captain Warren Bellamy had created the administrative structure that allowed Grant's operation to function without internal affairs interference. Warren had sealed the original investigation into Grant. His retirement accounts contained unexplained deposits. When federal agents arrested him at his home inside a gated neighborhood, Warren reportedly sat on the front steps and wept. The case Dorian constructed, the surveillance, financial records, forensic analysis, witness testimony, and hidden camera footage, was submitted to the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. Grant faced numerous federal charges, including civil rights violations, evidence tampering, conspiracy, facilitating drug distribution, and wire fraud. The Georgia Innocence Project and a special federal panel immediately reviewed the cases of previous defendants whose convictions might have resulted from planted evidence. Several had already served time. Others remained incarcerated. Some of the imprisoned men were released while the complete reviews continued. Their names deserve to be stated clearly. Marcus Bennett had lost a significant portion of his life to a false sentence. Darius Caldwell had lost even more. When Marcus left the correctional facility, his mother, Rochelle Bennett, spoke briefly outside. "I never stopped believing he was telling the truth." Then she held her son and said nothing else for a very long while. Grant's federal trial later began and continued through extensive testimony. Conrad did not lead the prosecution because defense attorneys did not ordinarily serve in that role during federal criminal cases. He sat inside the gallery and watched with the patient attention of a man who had already completed his part. Dorian testified in detail. He calmly explained the architecture of his investigation and presented complicated evidence with the methodical clarity he had developed throughout his career. Grant's defense team fought aggressively. They argued entrapment. They claimed Dorian manufactured the situation to trap their client. The argument collapsed beneath the body camera footage, financial evidence, forensic batch analysis, and Caleb's cooperation. Caleb's testimony was detailed, specific, and devastating in the way testimony often became when a conspirator accepted his fate and began exposing everyone around him. The jury convicted Grant on most counts. When the verdict was announced, he stood at the defense table with a motionless face. It was not composed in the way Dorian's face had been. It looked empty. Something fundamental had been removed from him. For a long time, institutional authority had protected Grant. The justice system treated his testimony as valuable and the testimony of his targets as inherently suspicious. The machinery had always worked in his favor. Now the machinery was looking directly at him. Grant received a lengthy federal prison sentence. Caleb received a reduced sentence because he cooperated and testified. Warren also received a federal sentence. Everett was never criminally charged, but voters did not return him to office. He announced before the election that he would not seek another term because he wanted to spend more time with his family. Almost no one believed him. During Grant's sentencing, the federal judge delivered a statement that was widely repeated. The judge said Grant had spent much of his career using the authority of his badge to treat certain citizens as targets rather than people deserving protection. He relied upon the belief that those targets would lack the money, credibility, or power necessary to hold him accountable. That belief had proven catastrophically wrong. The weight of his error would be measured by the years he spent inside federal prison. Those years, however, bore little relationship to what Marcus Bennett, Darius Caldwell, and the other victims had lost. Federal marshals removed Grant from the courtroom. His wife remained seated in the gallery without lifting her eyes from her lap. His daughter had attended every proceeding. Before the marshals reached the door, she stood and walked away. She did not look back. Several important events followed that attracted little public attention. Marcus enrolled at a community college in Atlanta and began studying business administration. He was starting over with the determination of a person who fully understood what had been taken from him. A nonprofit associated with the Georgia Innocence Project helped cover part of his tuition. Marcus also filed a civil lawsuit against Harlow City and its police department. An Atlanta civil rights firm represented him without charging a fee. The lawsuit eventually produced a substantial settlement. Darius Caldwell was older when the court completed his exoneration. Before his arrest, he had worked as an electrician. After his release, he returned to the profession. His former employer, a small electrical contractor operated by Vernon Price, had kept his position available because Vernon never believed the conviction was legitimate. Vernon later told a reporter that Darius returned to work immediately after the exoneration. He arrived in the morning and completed an entire shift without saying much about what had happened. "That is simply who Darius is," Vernon said. Rochelle Bennett became a leading figure in the Alliance for Justice and Policing, a Harlow City community organization that existed before the investigation but expanded greatly afterward. She gave interviews and attended city council meetings. Everyone who encountered her described her as formidable. Dorian continued working for the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The Harlow City case became a model examined in federal training materials. Investigators studied it as an example of how systematic evidence planting could be documented and prosecuted. Dorian agreed to one interview with a national publication. The reporter asked how he endured confinement while knowing his own identity and understanding the evidence he already possessed. His answer appeared prominently in the published article. "I endured it because 11 people before me endured it without having the option to stop it whenever they chose. The least I could do was understand what they experienced. The most I could do was make certain it mattered." Dorian declined every later interview request. The footage showing Caleb planting the evidence was viewed millions of times after its public release. One legal commentator called it among the most consequential pieces of body camera evidence in the history of American policing cases. That description may have been exaggerated. It also may not have been. The Harlow City Police Department entered a federal consent decree. The agreement required independent oversight, mandatory body camera rules, and a complete restructuring of internal affairs. Implementation was slow. Institutional interests resisted nearly every stage. The reforms were imperfect. According to most people who watched closely, however, they represented more accountability than the city had ever experienced. Dorian eventually returned quietly to Harlow City. He made no announcement. This time, he did not drive a rented Audi. He drove his own gray Ford Explorer, which carried many miles and a crack in the passenger side sun visor. He traveled through Riverside and approached the intersection near Calvert and 9th. Dorian stopped at the red light. He remained there quietly before continuing. He never explained what he thought about while sitting at that intersection. Perhaps there was nothing that needed to be said. Some reckonings remained private. Some forms of justice existed inside the body rather than in statements delivered from podiums. Dorian left Riverside and entered the highway. The fog-covered streets of Harlow City disappeared in his rearview mirror. Then he went home. There is something important about this story that cannot be found inside the verdicts, headlines, or millions of views. 11 real, specific, living human beings were arrested by Grant Rourke and Caleb Voss. They were placed in cells and processed through a system that treated their declarations of innocence as meaningless noise and their convictions as performance statistics. Marcus Bennett lost a significant part of his life. Darius Caldwell lost more. The other 9 victims lost portions of their own lives through incarceration, probation, criminal records, employment opportunities, housing applications, and family relationships damaged by absence. Those losses did not reverse simply because a court later admitted that the convictions were wrong. A federal review panel calculated that the combined professional and financial harm suffered by the 11 identified victims reached millions of dollars through lost wages, legal expenses, incarceration costs, and long-term economic consequences. The calculation did not include what could never be measured: the weight of being disbelieved, the destruction of trust in institutions created to provide protection, the particular exhaustion experienced by people whom the system treated as targets. Grant had many years inside federal prison to consider what he had done. No one outside his cell could know whether he used that time for genuine self-examination or continued creating stories in which he remained the victim. People who knew him said he had always possessed a remarkable ability to construct such narratives. He could convince himself almost sincerely that his version of events was the truth. Whether imprisonment could dismantle that kind of self-deception remained unknown. Caleb, serving a reduced sentence with the possibility of eventual release, reportedly requested a meeting with Marcus Bennett's attorney. The request reached Marcus. His response was brief. "Not yet." Not yet did not mean never. It also did not mean forgiveness. No reasonable person would demand that Marcus move toward forgiveness before he chose to do so, or at all. Camille entered private practice and began handling real estate contracts and estate planning. She was not the villain of the story in a simple, comfortable sense. She represented something more troubling than an obvious villain. Camille had been a person with every opportunity to see what was directly in front of her. She repeatedly and professionally chose not to look. Her eventual cooperation with federal authorities was genuine in the sense that she answered every question honestly once no alternative remained. Whether that cooperation represented moral redemption or practical self-preservation was a question she would have to answer for herself. Everett joined a private law firm specializing in corporate compliance. He gave no interviews. Warren remained inside a federal correctional institution. According to prison employees who later spoke anonymously to a journalist, he became a quiet presence. He was neither a troublemaker nor a leader. He appeared to be a man sitting beneath the weight of what he had enabled. Warren requested access to mental health counseling. The institution approved it. The Tennessee Lake House Grant purchased under his wife's maiden name was sold through federal asset forfeiture proceedings. Part of the proceeds entered a restitution fund for the identified victims. Marcus received a check. Darius received one. The other victims received payments as well. Compared with what had been taken from them, the checks were small. Money always was in cases like these. The law did its best. That was better than nothing and worse than enough. This story unfolded because one man refused to turn away from the truth. Dorian could have completed his report from a safe distance. He could have built the federal case without allowing the officers to place him inside a cell. He chose another path. He chose to understand not only intellectually but physically what Marcus Bennett, Darius Caldwell, and the other victims had experienced. By doing so, Dorian constructed a case that no amount of institutional resistance could ignore. Grant sat inside the courtroom believing he had already won. By the accounting of his victims, he had won many times before. He had every reason to believe he would win again. He forgot one thing. The man sitting in those handcuffs had been building a case against him for far longer than Grant could imagine. Justice moves slowly. It is imperfect. It does not repair everything it touches, but when it finally and undeniably arrives, it carries a weight that no smirk can withstand. When this story moves you, reminds you of the importance of work that happens outside public view, or shows you that ordinary and extraordinary people fight these battles every day, take action. Press the like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story. The stories that deserve to be told also deserve an audience. That audience is you.